What are the values of red that you think blue needs to integrate or to reintegrate?
Oh, that's actually pretty easy. Responsibility. I mean, we've actually even seen it. The ability to make a commitment and keep it, which by the way, ideologically shows up as either duty or loyalty, but those are both ideologies. The deeper sense is that ability. Responsibility, both at the individual and the group level, the ability to actually really make a personal sacrifice on the part of the group. That's actually a deeply red value. And I don't mean that, by the way, as politically ideological. Certainly there are people who are currently part of blue who feel that deeply. What I'm saying is that shows up much, much more intensely in red. And when you're feeling it in blue, you're actually feeling a red value, and that's good. Mixing them is crucial.
Because that's very Jordan Peterson-esque. How would you define Jordan Peterson, or do you think the issue is that he is not definable within one of those two camps?
Yeah, I think that's the point. I think that he grasps directly the fact that human beings can only actually make sense of the world by virtue of communication with other human beings. And this is all about the notion of admixture, that one must have a mixture of, well, I mean, he uses the mythopoetic to make sense, the order and chaos. The way, right? The Taoist way is the alchemical admixture of order and chaos. And that's it, like that's how you do it. And so if you bias towards orderliness, you find yourself in a rigid, non-adaptive, non-creative, non-exploratory framework, which will die because the world changes. If you bias towards chaos, you eat your young and evaporate, which also dies for obvious reasons. And the key is to actually enable these things to be in relationship with each other, in vital, healthy relationship with each other. And I think that's in some sense the essence of what he's focusing on, and is sort of the core of what he's actually about.
Peterson is hard for the broadcast media to get a handle on, because the depth of his thought means he doesn't fit easily into any of their categories. The clash with Cathy Newman was his breakthrough moment, where the new world met the old. To give the context from Cathy Newman's side, she has to do dozens of interviews each month. Peterson is hard to get a grip on, and he sure as hell looks controversial. She's also focused on getting sound bites for a 5-minute cut down of the interview for TV, not a long conversation for online.
The interview was ridiculous. It was a ridiculous interview. I mean, I listened to it or watched it several times. I was like, this is so strange. Like her determination to turn it into a conflict, it's one of the issues that I have with television shows.
Yeah.
Because they have a very limited amount of time, and they're trying to make things as salacious as possible. They want to have these sound bites, these clickbait sound bites. And she just went into it incredibly confrontational, not trying to find your actual perspective, but trying to force you to defend a non-realistic perspective.
Yes, well, I was the hypothetical villain of her imagination, essentially. Yeah. No, this is also why YouTube is going to kill TV. Because television, by its nature, all of these narrow broadcast technologies, they rely on forcing the story, right? Because it has to happen now. It has to happen often in 5 minutes, because they only broadcast 5 minutes of that interview. They did put the whole thing up on YouTube.
To their credit.
It hasn't ceased to amaze me yet. I think that they thought that the interview went fine.
After the interview, Channel 4 News found themselves at the centre of an online storm, which included some nasty, personal and misogynistic attacks. It's understandable that they just wanted it to go away. But online is forever, and as the centre of gravity continues to shift away from traditional media, this interview is, I would argue, a slow motion and continuing car crash for Channel 4's credibility. So why did it happen? Partly the limitations of the medium of TV, but also because of the institutional political blindness of the mainstream media. I've always considered myself of the liberal left, but especially since the election of Trump, I've been trying to understand what happened, and I'm convinced that the polarisation we're seeing is mainly driven by the shadow side of liberalism, in particular, where supposedly inclusive social justice liberalism stops being inclusive and secretly judges and despises people that don't think the same way. The rebellion of Trump and Brexit was a direct response. As Uri Harris argues in this article in Quillette, the new gatekeepers of the media have become a new bourgeoisie, enforcing a rigid etiquette and using the rights of the oppressed as an excuse to put forward a vision of the kind of society they personally want to live in. On the surface level, it's about how a narrow social justice worldview embodied by Cathy Newman in the interview became the new status quo, and how this institutional bias of much of the mainstream media means it can't see or understand the forces that are challenging this new consensus. The counterculture used to be on the left, but once it won the culture war, it left space for a new counterculture. The biggest manifestation is the red pill phenomena, which the mainstream media mistakenly assumes is the same thing as the alt-right.
I was surprised to just discover the overlap between what I'm into, particularly like Greek philosophy and Stoicism, and the alt-right, who I'd always thought of, if I come across them at all, I thought them as kind of swivel-eyed bogeymen, completely unpalatable extremists in their basements. And then to discover that, a lot of them were, a lot of people into Stoicism were also really into the alt-right, made me wonder what was going on and why people like me were getting radicalized and drawn into it.
Could you explain what Stoicism is as a summary?
Stoicism is basically an ancient Greek philosophy which became very popular in the Roman Empire, with like the Emperor Marcus Aurelius was a Stoic, for example. And it's in some ways like a Western form of Buddhism. It's like a therapy for the emotions. It teaches you to take responsibility for your thoughts, to take and thereby to take some control over your emotions. So in some ways, it's putting forward a model of strength and integrity and kind of resilience amid adversity and rapid change. So for that reason, it's become very popular in the last 10 years.
I think this is also why, from my perspective at least, someone like Jordan Peterson is often looked from the outside as being aligned with the alt-right, because he has a similar message, but there are crucial differences, I think, between what we would consider. I mean, certainly white nationalism would be an essential part of the alt-right, I would say, of any useful definition. And yeah, that's certainly not characteristic of Jordan Peterson from my experience.
No, there's a crucial difference, at least between Stoicism and the alt-right, even though a lot of alt-right is into Stoicism, in that Stoicism and maybe Jordan Peterson as well, I'm not an expert on him, talk about the way to gain strength and maturity and power is internal. It's to take responsibility for your own thoughts and feelings. Whilst I think people sometimes, men, might look for that sense of power and control externally by suppressing or segregating anyone who they feel threatened by, whether that's other colors or other sexualities or gender. So there's a crucial difference there. One is about kind of inner integrity and just kind of being strong within yourself, and the other is about trying to take control through the kind of exterior borders and fences, if you see what I mean.
Every public appearance that I've made that's related to the sort of topics that we're discussing is overwhelmingly men. It's like 85 to 90%. And so I thought, wow, that's weird. Like, what the hell's going on here exactly? And then the other thing I've noticed is that I've been talking a lot to the crowds that I've been talking to, not about rights, but about responsibility, right? Because you can't have the bloody conversation. What are you doing? You can't have the conversation about rights without the conversation about responsibility, because your rights are my responsibility. That's what they are, technically. So you just can't have only half of that discussion. And we're only having half that discussion. And the question is, well, what the hell are you leaving out if you only have that half of the discussion? And the answer is, well, you're leaving out responsibility. And then the question is, well, what are you leaving out if you're leaving out responsibility? And the answer might be, well, maybe you're leaving out the meaning of life.